Welcome to the NNJR Trackside Classroom Series on Zoom. This session is about braking. It's oriented to student drivers, but we'll be talking about on-track braking techniques that may be useful for drivers in any group. Thank you for joining this session and watching. And I hope, like always, that you take away one or two or perhaps more tips that you can find useful when you're driving on track. Now, before we dive in, let me just try to dispel a couple of myths. If you've never driven on the track before, you've probably got this impression that many people have that it's all about slamming on the brakes at the last possible moment and standing the car on its nose and perhaps even sliding it around the corner that way. Those of you that have driven on track know that that couldn't be further from the truth. The second thing to be aware of if you're new to track driving is that it's sort of the opposite of driving on the street. And we'll talk more about that as we get into this. But I hope, again, that you find some tips that are useful and that they allow you to have a good time at Lime Rock when we're there very soon. So with that, I'm going to, if I can get Zoom to wake up here, I'm going to put the slides up and we'll get started. So we're going to talk about proper track braking technique. And as the Mario Andretti quote suggests, using the brakes has a lot more to do than just slowing the car down. So with that, let's dive in. Of course, the normal disclaimer that anything you try here that doesn't work is your fault. We are all taking risks when we're on track, and you need to be aware of that. So our agenda for this session, we'll talk briefly about the sequence we learn things on track. We'll break down the steps entering a corner, get into the details of braking and trail braking, including Lime Rock examples. Then we'll wrap up and talk about Lime Rock turn by turn. So the learning sequence, or how do we learn, or what's the right way to learn when we go on track? Well, this is from the Skip Barber School in the book Going Faster by Carl Lopez. First step is to learn the line. And if you're new to the track, that will be your first thing you want to work on. Next is, how do we exit the corner? Because time on track is dictated by the time we spend on the straightaways, which means we need to exit corners quickly. And by the way, doing that properly with the laid apex is also the safest way around a corner. And finally, braking. Now, that isn't to say we don't have to brake properly to learn the line. We do have to have a certain amount of braking technique. But if we want to think about refining our technique on track, braking may be later. But that said, there's some basics that we're going to talk about in this session. So let's break down entering a corner. We're on a straightaway, our foot's on the floor, on the gas pedal, and we're getting ready to brake. Well, we're going to move our foot from the gas pedal to the brake pedal. We're going to do that as quickly as we can, but we're not going to jump on the brake pedal. We're going to squeeze it quickly in the fashion that, think about it this way. We've put our foot on the brake pedal, we feel some resistance, and then we press hard. We don't just jump on it. So that small step of feeling some resistance and then squeezing is enough to keep from upsetting the car. And we'll talk more about the steps after that. And of course, once we're on the brakes, we're going to slow the car down in a straight line. In fact, that's where most of the slowing is going to happen. At some point, we're going to turn into the corner. And in most corners, we're going to still be on some brake effort at that point. Not 100% by any stretch, but less brake. And the fancy term for that is trail braking. The way to think about that is just turning while braking. We do that every day when we drive to work or to the store or wherever. And then finally, when we're done, we're going to take our foot off the brake and put it back on the gas pedal. That is kind of where the magic happens. That's more an advanced discussion. But even as a beginner, you can consciously do that smoothly rather than in a rough fashion. So let's talk about the very basics of braking. They start with being seated properly in the car. You have to have the right leg, assuming you're braking with your right foot, with enough force that you can put the gas pedal on the floor without reaching. You can get on the brakes with full force without straining your leg. If you're reaching at all or feel any strain, you're too far away. The second point is we want the right heel to be a pivot point. We want the right heel to stay put so that when we squeeze the gas pedal, we're doing that with the ball of our foot. And when we use the brake pedal, we do that with the ball of our foot. And the heel more or less stays in the same spot as a pivot point. That's much better from a technique point of view and a consistency point of view. Next, perhaps obviously, we want to pick a consistent point where we get on the brakes. And this is harder perhaps for beginners than you might think, but typically it's a brake marker or a cone or a spot on the track or something of that sort. But we want to find a consistent point, but we also want to be aware that as a beginner, we're probably not approaching the corner, given corner at the same pace each lap. And we have to be aware that that will obviously affect the amount of braking we need to do. Heel and toe is not a beginner thing. It's not something we teach on the track, but it is something you can practice on the street and need to learn as you get better. You can certainly do just fine on the track without knowing heel and toe in the green run group and perhaps in the yellow run group. But if you want to progress any beyond that, you need to really know heel and toe. Now, of course, modern cars have auto blip, which makes that much easier if you have a stick. And if you have a PDK, then the computer takes care of all of that for you. So kind of cheating for those of us who are used to the old school, but that modern technology does make some things easier, and this is certainly one. So what are some of the common mistakes that we see? Well, in the green run group, an inconsistent braking point. In other words, not getting on the brakes at the same place every lap, and inconsistent effort on the brake. We're going to refer to that as brake pressure. Just think of that as the amount of effort your right foot is putting on the brake pedal. Another common mistake, which too many people do on the street as well as on the track, is they jump on and off the brake pedal and even the gas pedal for that matter. So we want to squeeze all of these pedals. The old saying was, pretend there's an egg between your foot and the gas pedal and the brake. Well, that may be extreme, but you get the idea. Another common mistake is to get on the brakes at perhaps the appropriate point, but to only get on half of the brake effort or whatever, and then to get closer to the corner and the turn-in point and realize, oh, I'm going faster than I really want to be, so now I need to brake more. Well, as we'll learn, that's the opposite of what we want to do. In yellow and blue run groups, we see the same mistake for different reasons usually. As people try to go a little bit faster, they may brake a little bit later, and they still may not get on enough brake effort to slow down. A similar mistake is to be on heavy brake effort, and then after we turn in, and then immediately go to the gas pedal, perhaps aggressively. That's obviously not going to make the car happy, and it's certainly not the fast way or the safe way around a corner. And a common mistake as people do go faster is trying to, quote, brake late. I'm not going to take the time in this session to explain why that's a bad idea, but take my word for it that braking 10 feet earlier and modulating your brake pedal is going to be a whole lot faster and more consistent than trying to squeeze the last few feet out of the braking zone. So let's relate some of this now to Lime Rock. At Lime Rock, all the corners are fast. There's no really slow corners. Big Bend, as we will talk, is a classic trail braking corner. What I mean by that is we'd like to carry the brakes and as far as possible into the corner and extend the front straightaway as far as we can. And the reason is simple. Turn 2, the second half of Big Bend, is slower than the first half, turn 1. So there's no percentage in exiting turn 1 quickly because we have to slow down for turn 2. So since we can't exit quickly, why don't we enter quickly? And we want to do that by carrying as much speed and trail braking into the corner. And we'll talk more about that, but that's one of the both challenges and fun aspects of driving Lime Rock is Big Bend, signature corner, great fun done properly. The left-hander that comes right after Big Bend is a throwaway corner or a compromise corner. And we have to make a fairly sharp turn there, and using trail brake, in other words, continuing to brake while we're turning, is going to help most cars turn. And therefore, we're going to do some more trail braking just like we did in Big Bend. On the other hand, it kind of 180 degrees, from a technique point of view, the rest of the track, the uphill, the west bend, turn, and downhill are fast corners where we want very little trail brake. We're going to do most of our braking in a straight line, and it's not going to be heavy braking. It's going to be gentle, or what we sometimes call brush the brakes, so that we don't upset the car for these fast corners. So we'll say more about that, but you can see there is a variety of technique required to get around just what may seem like 7 simple corners, which to no one are simple. So let's peel this back a little bit, and let me suggest a way to think about your braking effort that may help you visualize how to train your right foot on the brake pedal. So first, let's think about the amount of effort we put on the brake pedal, or if you want to translate it to how much brake effort your brake pedal is translating to the car. Well, 10 is full on. We've got the brakes on as much as possible. The ABS may have been activated, probably has been, and we're applying maximum brake. 0, on the other hand, obviously is no brake. And we have a scale that is 0 to 10 scale in between. Now, laws of physics say that maximum stopping is not at 10, but it's at 9 point something. Let's just say 9.5 for sake of discussion here. And that's where, if we're in a corner, approaching a corner where we really need to slow down, we'd like to brake up somewhere in that vicinity. But what does this really look like when we apply it to a corner? Let's talk about hard braking, entering a corner with hard braking, and like Big Bend at Lime Rock. Here we do want to use most of the brake effort. So as we get on the brakes, again, we're not going to jump on them. We're going to squeeze the pedal and then press hard. And we're going to get to that 9 effort, just short of activating the ABS. And we're going to hold that for a bit. And for sake of illustration, I've shown, kind of 999, and then 888, and then some 7s and 6s and 5s and so on. As we begin to slow down, we approach the turn in, and the car can't turn and brake at maximum effort at the same time. So we obviously have to be reducing the brake effort as we approach the turn in. And on a corner like Big Bend, we probably want to be in the range of 2 or 3 at the turn in. A common mistake is to be at 5 or 6 or 7 by not getting on a 9 at the first time, but maybe getting on a 5 or 6 or 7 and then realizing, gee, I need more effort. So again, we want to use that hard effort early to slow the car down so that we can smoothly. You can see why the term trail brake comes in, or trail off the brakes, because we're trying to trail off the effort, bring it down smoothly. And after we turn in, we're going to continue that. We're going to go to 2, to 1, to a half, and then to 0. And then we're going to quickly but smoothly move our foot from the brake pedal to the gas pedal. And we're just going to tickle the gas pedal at that point. In other words, we're not going to jump on it. Depending on the corner. In the case of Big Bend, we're just going to apply a little bit of gas to maintain momentum. In other corners, we might begin to squeeze the gas pedal, but in all cases, it's not a jump, but it's a smooth squeeze of the gas. Now, not every corner at all tracks, and certainly at Lime Rock, is a heavy brake of that sort. I've already mentioned we call it brush braking, for the fast corners in the back. And so here I've shown an illustration of what that might look like, recognizing this. I don't want you to take this totally literally, but I do want you to take literally that your effort is probably a 3 or a 2 or at most a 4 as you approach these corners. And all of that braking is going to be done in a straight line. We're going to be down to almost no brake, a 0.5 perhaps when we turn in, so that right after we turn in, we can smoothly come off and get back on the gas to settle the car, plant the car, and get through these quick corners. Because fast corners, we want the weight on the back to settle the car. Otherwise, the car is going to be nervous. So very different techniques here, if you want to think about it that way, but only on the amount of effort that's applied initially. In a heavy braking zone, we want to use the full braking force. In the brush braking, we're going to scrub off some speed, but we're going to do it over a longer period of time with less effort. And I'm not going to explain the logic, but no, that doesn't really slow you down. This is, in fact, the faster way to get around the track. And by the way, much more comfortable in the seat of the pants. Now, for those of you in yellow or blue, as you get better and you've mastered much of what we've been talking about, now is the time to start thinking about the end of braking and to refine that transition off the brakes onto the gas. Because where we finish braking and how we finish it is much more important than the start of braking. And we can use that end of braking point as a critical reference point, to the point where if we can get consistent there, we'll be consistent in the corner. Now, to approach, to learn this technique, a first step is to start being aware of how much brake pressure you're applying at turn in. And that needs to be the same each lap. If you're turning in one lap to Big Bend at 3 and the next lap at 1.5 and the next lap at 4, focus on being consistent at turn in. Once you have that in the ballpark, then we can focus on the end of braking. Again, this is a more advanced technique, but planting a seed for everybody. So to summarize, there's a lot to learn in track braking technique. It starts with the basics, but certainly remember that hard initial brake and gentle release, the opposite in many ways of what we do on the street. And think about the braking zone in thirds, where the first third is about slowing the car down. So we're going to do that hard, heavy brake in the first third. We're going to get the car slowed down. The next third is about the downshift, getting that done smoothly. Yes, we're continuing some braking effort, but we've already taken off a lot of speed and we're making the downshift nice and smooth. And the last third is about coming off the brakes. Now, literally, that may not be true, but mentally, that's how you should think about it, because that puts the priorities in the right place. We talked about trail braking, meaning braking while turning, and that varies by corner, as we've discussed. It varies by car to some extent. As if you're driving in the green run group, you don't have to worry about that. As you get more experience, you'll learn that mid-engine cars generally like less trail brake than front or rear engine cars. And all of us, including the most sophisticated pro out there, can work to refine their transition off the brake onto the gas. The goal being that if I were riding with you in the right seat and I could not tell when your foot came off the brake pedal and got on the gas pedal. If you can master that, then you're doing very well indeed. So that's a quick summary of braking technique on the track. Let's dive into Lime Rock turn by turn and see how some of that works. Before we do that, just a reminder about passing zones. All the passing zones are on the right, except the short chute that's between turns 2 and 3 between Big Bend and the left-hander. For students, find this a very busy place to give a pass, but it is a good place you can give a pass, whichever side you're comfortable on. So let's talk about Big Bend, the signature corner. I included this diagram here because you can see that the second half of the corner here, turn 2, is much tighter than the first half, turn 1. And that's why we want to trail brake in and carry as much speed to lengthen that front straightaway. Now the line into Big Bend that I prefer is to actually, at about the 5 brake marker, turn the wheel slightly, and I'm not on the brakes yet, just turn the wheel slightly to aim across the track like you see here. And then we can brake in a straight line as hard as we like. And we can carry that brake all the way down in toward the apex and even past it. So that's the idea in approaching this corner. The other thing to point out is the line in the middle of the corner here only goes to mid-track. And that's because of the banking or camber that's in the track. If this track were banked the way, the full width, the same way it is in the inside third, then we would use much more of the width here. But if we go past the middle of the track here, we lose quite a bit of grip. So here's a picture of what that looks like from the 5 brake marker. And as I said, we're going to diagonal across. From this point, we can just sort of aim to the right side of the bridge and brake toward that as a reference point. As we get a little bit closer, now we've angled over a bit and we're aimed now at the concrete, which is quite visible from this point. You can see it more clearly here, but the apex is well past the bridge, actually. And the apex here is the early part of that concrete curb. Now, as we get to start to get past the beginning of Big Bend, we realize that we're in the very beginning of a very large 180-degree turn that goes on and on. And we need to get the eyes up and to the right because we can't even see the apex of turn 2 in this corner, in this view from the camera yet, because it's such a long ways around. So we want to get the eyes over here, not here, but way over here, because that's where we want to go. And a good reference here, there's a flag station over near the apex. You want to be looking at that as soon as you can from the apex of turn 1. And here you see the note to use just the inside part of the track. It's hard to see in the photo here, but if you look carefully when you're on track, you'll see there's a bit of a seam here and that the camber or banking is very different. Turn 2 is an easy place to get impatient, which causes the driver to be either early or too fast, neither which is good. So we have to be patient. We have to balance the car with the throttle. This is a good place to kind of learn what your car feels like on throttle, because we're not braking at this point, but we're not really trying to accelerate either. We're just trying to carry momentum and set up turn 2 by being patient. We can use the gas pedal to steer the car even by, if we need to tuck the nose in, we can lift the gas pedal a little bit. If we need to run out a little bit wider, we can squeeze it just gently. But the key thing is to be looking at that apex and to make sure that we're not early, and also look through the apex at the track out. Track out you see here on the left. This corner, if you are early or too fast, then there's all this space on the left we can drive off into. If we try to keep the car on the track here when the car doesn't want to stay on the track, this tire wall on the inside, unfortunately, has been known to eat cars for drivers who did not simply drive it off. So use your patience, respect this corner. It deserves more respect than a lot of people give it. As we exit the corner, we now have a nice target in front of us up here. it's hard to see here, but there's a brightly red painted men's room, and it's a great target. We want to aim right toward it. You can see it a little bit better here. And it puts us kind of mid-track or the right-hand half of the track as we approach turn 3. And in general, we want to be 1 or 1.5 car widths in from the right side as we approach turn 3, the left-hander. And we want to be patient here as well, because this turn is a compromise, the apex is incredibly late and a long ways around. And which means it's very easy to be early or too fast. Our objective here, and if we get our eyes over here, this will help know what to do. Our objective is to have the car along the left side of the track, right on the white paint here, exiting the turn, and straight. And that will set us up properly for the right-hander on to the no-name straight in the back. So this is our objective. This is where our eyes need to be as we're approaching turn 3. This will help us get around properly. And here you see, that white line that I mentioned on the left. We want to be straight there, and that sets us up to turn in. And so as we approach the turn in here, no brake. We just lift momentarily while we turn to help the car turn, and then we can get back on, some gas, again, squeezing the gas gently, while we get the car in tight on the apex. And we want to get the eyes, even from here, we want to start looking down track at track out so we see where we're going. And certainly as we approach the apex now, we want to have the eyes down here. Hiding in the shadows here, is a flag station that's a good reference point as well. This apex, we want to be in as tight as we can get because there's favorable camber in there, but the curb isn't that friendly, so we don't really want to bump the curb because that can upset the car here. Oh, and I do want to point out one more thing. As we approach track out, kind of past the apex arrow here in the middle of the track goes off camber. And so we really do want to be on line and under control, because if we're carrying a little bit too much speed past the apex and we're not really comfortably pointed at track out, we're going to lose grip mid-track at the worst possible moment if we're carrying too much speed. So this is another gotcha, if you will, from Lime Rock that you really need to pay attention to. Now we have 3 fast corners coming up. And this is where, instead of the trail braking that we've talked about before, now we're going to do the brush braking. We're going to brake early, gently, and we're going to be coming off the brakes right after we turn in very smoothly. And it may seem like we're getting on the brakes very early, but we're not slowing down that much. We're only taking a little bit of speed off, and we're doing it gently so that we don't upset the car, because the car needs to be able to turn and then take a set and get through this fast corner. And if we brake too hard, we're going to upset the car, and we can't carry that momentum and speed through the corner. So we're going to turn in, and we're going to trail off the brakes, gently pick up the gas, very quickly after the turn in point here. Now, one of the things that makes the uphill very interesting is that as we start to get into it past the apex, we really do hit the hill, if you will. We start to go uphill, which gives us a lot more grip. And guess what? We can turn a little bit more, which is helpful here. And in particular, it's helpful because we want to get the car straight to go over that crest that you see up ahead here. So there are actually 2 turn-in points, if you will, or 2 turn-in motions in this corner. And it actually drives a bit like 2 corners in that respect. But it is important to be straight as we go over the hill, because the car is going to get light, especially if you have a lot of horsepower. If your foot's on the floor, the rear wheels are going to spin or worse. And so the car needs to be straight. And if you do have a lot of horsepower, don't have the foot on the floor going over the hill. You'll have to breathe it to go over the hill here. There's a reason the fast sports cars and others use the chicane that's on the right here and don't drive the uphill anymore like they did many years ago. Next, we approach West Bend, classic right-hand corner, nice and flat, no real elevation to affect this corner. A common mistake here is to kind of cheat in before we get to the apex, but we want to stay all the way along that white line until we turn in. And once we're approaching the turn in, we want to be looking through that apex at track out. And a good reference is we can see the bridge off to the right here. We can get the eyes up there, to know kind of where we're headed. The apex here is what's called an apex zone. We want to run several feet along the apex. And in this case, there's a road here. So the curb actually isn't as high where the road goes across it. And that, in fact, is the apex here. And as I say, we want to run along that. We certainly want to have our eyes down at the bridge. As we head down the hill, we want to be track left again, because the downhill turn coming up is another right-hander. And in fact, we want to just follow that left side of the asphalt all the way down the hill, because it actually gives us the perfect line. It's actually wider than the white line until we get down to the turn-in point. So we want to use that width to line us up to optimize this corner. I see the apex arrow is in the wrong place. The turn is where the turn-in is, and my apologies on that. The turn-in point here, yes, there's a cone, but it's easy to figure out. As the front end of the car hits the flat part of the road, it's time to turn. And that's convenient because it puts a little extra load in the front, and the car will turn nicely. And again, we want the eyes down track toward the track out, which at this point is a long ways down. We have another apex curb and sort of an apex zone here. And again, we want the eyes down track. This is a fast corner. It's another corner though where favorable banking and camber in here, but as we get further out toward track out, it goes off camber again. So just like entering no name straight in the back, entering the front straight, the camber is favorable when we're near the apex. Shortly after the apex, it becomes unfavorable. So a couple reminders about Lime Rock. We talked about trail braking into Big Bend and the left-hander. You now know what that is. We talked about brush or minimum trail braking for other corners, meaning brake early and lightly. Be aware of that adverse camber onto both straightaways and in the second half of in all of Big Bend, but especially in the second half. And it's helpful to find reference points that don't move because cones do move. So your instructor will work with you on that, but that's always good practice for all of us when we're on track. I hope that's given you some sense of how to drive Lime Rock and some idea about how to do braking and what braking technique is like on the track. I look forward to seeing you at Lime Rock and on track. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.